So I've been on YouTube lately and I'm seeing a hell of a lot of videos titled things like Dystopian UK, It's the End, and just generally lots of doom and gloom in regards to people that most often they're leaving the UK or they've been away and they've come back and they're giving you the views on how bad the UK is. I've been out of the UK for about 3.5 years, just come back about a year ago, and having travelled to over 50 countries over a 15-20 year period, I feel like I've got some good perspective to give on how the UK compares to the rest of the world. So what I'm about to say is very much my own opinion, and I'm very interested to see what other people think, especially those that have lived abroad for an extended period of time, ideally in multiple different places. But this is my take on the state of the UK as it is right now. One of the biggest factors why people leave the UK, including myself in the past, is for financial reasons and the cost of living in the UK. Regardless of what country you're in, most people's largest expense is accommodation. And this is very much the biggest problem with the UK and very much my primary motive on why I've left in the past and why when I do buy a property, it's probably not going to be in the UK. For someone such as myself, I'd be looking at, say, a 1-bedroom apartment in the UK. And I would say, on average, taking the whole country into account, you're probably looking at somewhere between £700 and £1,000 just for the rental. And then you've got things like council tax and all your utility bills on top of that. So everything factored in, you're probably looking at a budget of between, say, £850 and £1,250. Now, obviously, that would be a lot more if you were in London, for example, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to exclude London. On top of extremely high rental prices, if you want to buy your own place, for the vast majority of people, you're going to be locked in for 25, 30, 35 years. And that means working for all those years, full-time job, just to sustain yourself. An equivalent property abroad, being very broad brush here, but starting as low as I had a property in India, 2-bedroom apartment, very nice, and it was £160 a month. And then say you could go to Thailand in a more touristy area and you might be looking at more like £500 a month. But either way, typical costs abroad are going to be way under half what they are in the UK. I've been pondering buying a property here in the UK, but in an ideal world, I'd want my own land with, a small dwelling on it, an acre or two, and that just isn't really a viable option, maybe outside of remote parts of Scotland. By contrast, Spain, Italy, Portugal, between £40,000 and £80,000, depending on how nice you want it. So in relation to property, whether it's rental or buying, it definitely gets a big thumbs down for me, and it's just very poor value for money. Another big factor why people may leave the UK, and again is always a big consideration for me, is the climate. So I'm recording this video in the middle of November, and it's been really cold, really wet, really miserable for a few weeks now, and that's very likely to continue all the way through to the end of March. So you're looking at 4 months where the weather's really, really poor. And I do believe that a lot of people are affected by the sad seasonal affective disorder, and I find just generally people's morale in the winter months is just a hell of a lot lower. All that being said, from around April to the middle to the end of October, the weather's pretty temperate. Now, it's very inconsistent and it's rare to get long spells of sunshine, but normally anywhere between sort of 12 degrees up to sort of high 20s maybe in the summer. So no complaints for 8-9 months of the year. Another big topic is food. Now, this is where I'm going to defend the UK somewhat. So in terms of shopping at the supermarkets, I haven't been to another country better than the UK in terms of quality, variety, and in relation to cost. What I've found is when you compare to, say, Southeast Asia or some of the lesser developed countries in Europe, the food in the supermarket, it is cheaper there, but not by much. And when you factor in against the quality and the availability of a wide range of produce, certainly say the UK is definitely up there from a food perspective. In terms of eating out, again, I think the food is very good over here. However, eating out compared to the rest of the developing world, for sure, the UK again is pretty poor value to eat out. Asia, as an example, you can probably go out and have a good feed for for £10, whereas here, you're probably looking at 2 or 3 times that to go and eat out. And so for that reason, it doesn't really make sense for people to eat out often. Excuse me while I take a quick interlude for a nice pano raisin. So from some of these videos I've been watching, I've kept a bit of a list of some of people's complaints, and I'm going to address them one by one and just explain whether I agree or not. So one of the first ones is cleanliness. People moan about it being dirty and there being litter, and I just don't see that myself. Of course, there's going to be pockets around the country where things may be worse, but when you compare it to other countries, I would say we're right up there in terms of how we look after things, in terms of maintenance, cleanliness, litter and things like that. So from my experience and comparing it to many other countries, I do not in any way consider Britain to be dirty. Far from it. One of the big problems with the UK is a lot of people sit in front of the TV and watch the news, and there's a lot of sensationalism, and that kind of feeds into people's psyches. There's a phrase, mimetic, which is, it's kind of like then a fever that then catches on to everybody. So everybody has that doom and gloom mentality because everyone's sat in front of the TV watching the news or consuming social media. And yeah, that's a worldwide problem, but I certainly get a gut feel that with our media the way it is, it's definitely worse here than what it is in other countries. And on top of that fact, if you're a Brit in a foreign country, you're probably not consuming the news, in the local language, and you don't really have as much of an attachment to it. So I do believe that the news and the negativity surrounding that does cause a problem with morale in the UK. People complain about public services, and I am going to agree in some ways here. So we're looking at public transport. So primarily, my main complaint is the railway system here in the UK. So it's extremely expensive and the service is poor. I used the train when I first got back to the country before I bought a vehicle. I used the train a lot, and I would say 1 in 3 times it would be delayed. And on top of that, I remember going down to London for a meeting from the northwest. So the journey time was about 2 hours and 10 minutes or something like that. And a return trip same day was certainly over £200. I think it was £220 or £240. When in comparison, you can fly to the south of Spain and back for about £100. Another big complaint is with the NHS. It's often a hot topic over it about long waiting lists. Now, my personal opinion is that it should be privatised. Privatised means tested, so people that can't afford it should get free access and then go to the American system, because this system doesn't work. I've heard people complain about the roads and potholes, and again, from my own experience, I just don't see it. Since I've been back, driving in a pothole and having an issue with the vehicle, the roads are very well maintained. On the downside, there's always roadworks going on everywhere, but I guess that's the price you pay for having decent roads. In terms of British people and friendliness, I certainly wouldn't put us, up at the top of the table. I think of sort of Thailand, I think of India, the United States are more outgoing, more talkative, more friendly on paper, shall we say. But I do think as Brits, we are pretty friendly, pretty helpful, pretty talkative. We have a good sense of humour. So in terms of the people within the UK, generally speaking, no complaints at all. One stat that we often see in the media is the happiness index, and the UK is always pretty low on that. And I can only think that that is a combination of it's an expensive country to live in. The weather isn't great. So when you factor those two things in, it equates to quite a hard life, and people are working 40 hours a week just to sustain themselves, to pay the rent, to pay all the bills, the food shop, etc. And so from my perspective, I feel like I could at some point, when I so decide, live abroad and live more cost effectively, have more time on our hands, not have to work as hard, which in turn leads to a happier life in my book. Being forced to work is more likely to lead to lower morale. So I've spoken quite a lot about negative or potentially negative sides of the UK, but I think in the name of fairness, it's only right to talk about some of the positives. I would definitely talk about the natural beauty of the UK. It's not something that I really realised when I was younger. But having traveled to plenty of countries, there's so many places in the UK that are just top notch in terms of natural beauty. Top 5 would be Cornwall, Wales, the likes of Snowdonia National Park. You've got the Lake District as you then go further up. And then, of course, you've got Scotland, the North Coast, the West Coast in particular I've been to. When you drive through them, they're immaculate, they're beautiful. It's definitely something that I took for granted living in the UK. Is very much a big plus. You're never really too far from nature in the UK, and we really shouldn't take it for granted as UK citizens. Do believe that all the negativity towards the UK is overcooked, for want of a better word. And the very fact that there's many people around the world that would absolutely give an arm and a leg to come over here, I think we should probably be a little bit more appreciative of the good sides of the UK. So if you're still watching, thanks very much. I'm genuinely interested in what you think, especially, if you've been abroad for an extended period of time and come back. Do you think the UK is screwed? Do you think there's hope? Do you like the UK? Do you not like the UK? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.